Um, Today, thank you all for coming. Welcome again. I have so many people entering all at once here. Um, we're very excited about this. Murray Stein is going to be our moderator for today. He's internationally known Jungian analyst, and I'm sure many of you have heard of him. He's written many books, and he's a frequent speaker at the Jung Society of Washington. So, Murray, I'm going to let you take over and introduce everyone else. Okay.
Thank you very much, Pat. And also thank you to the Jung Society of Washington for hosting this auspicious occasion, the book launch of Dale Kushner's book, Wild Freedom, The Princess Who Found Her Name. And I want to welcome the audience to this book launch. We will have several speakers who will speak about their contributions and about Dale's work and the fairy tale that this book is focused on, Wild Freedom. And I will begin just by saying a few words about the book. As I say, it's a fairy tale, or its central core is a fairy tale that came to Dale at midlife. It arrived. She'll tell you about how that came to her. It reads like a classic fairy tale, an Andersen fairy tale, or a Grimm's fairy tale, but it's a very personal story on the other hand. So it's collective and it's personal. And it's a very deep story about a passage from collectivity to individuality. Can put it in a nutshell, something like that. So Dale wrote the fairy tale, and then a number of us were enlisted to write some words about it, commentaries and reflections. And we will speak. First, I will introduce Dale, and she will speak about her work with this fairy tale. Then Dariane Pictet will speak about her contribution, then Henry Abramovitch. And I will say a few words after all that as well. I want to say, though, that the fairy tale that we hope you will all read in time if you buy the book, Wild Freedom, The Princess Who Found Her Name. The fairy tale is an individuation story. I realize that some in the audience are not familiar with Jungian concepts, and others are very familiar, but let me just say that individuation, that word in the Jungian lexicon, means a lifelong process of psychological and spiritual development. And there are certain moments in that narrative that stand out. We call them transition periods or transformation periods, when one shifts from one stage of life to another. And this is a story of a character, a fictional character, the princess, who steps out of her social role, what we call a persona. She goes on a journey into the inner world, into the world of imagination. And we think of that as a journey into the unconscious, into the depths of the unconscious. And she has adventures there. It's an adventure story. It's a story of a widening consciousness as she goes and what she learns. And then it's a story of coming back and stepping back into the social world as a princess. But now she comes back with a new name. And you'll find out what that means as we comment on this story. It's a classical three-part transformation process: separation, liminality, and re-entry. This is an initiation process pattern that has been practiced since forever by human beings to mark transitions, to facilitate transitions, and to develop a deeper sense of identity during the individuation journey. So that's all I'm going to say about it right now. And I'm going to introduce Dale, first of all, who will be the first speaker. In case you don't know it, Dale is a celebrated author. She wrote a wonderful novel that won some awards, Conditions of Love. It's a novel of love, loss, and resilience. And then she wrote a book of poems based on her images and imagination about Mary Magdalene called the M Poems. She's a poet, novelist, a poet, and she has a monthly column, very popular with Psychology Today, called Transcending the Past. In her work, she brings together her literary capacities, her literary art. She brings in depth psychology, Jungian in particular. She brings in spirituality, and she also has her finger on science. So it's many threads that are woven together in Dale's work, which is so interesting. But above all, I want to say she is a creative personality who found her true name and her voice. In her article, Writing as Self-Enchantment, Thoughts on Imagination, Mystery, and the Unconscious, which is published in this book, she tells the story about how this fairy tale emerged and spoke to her. Dale?
Okay. Murray, thank you. That was beautiful and a great synopsis for, especially for people who haven't read the book. And I'm thrilled to be here. I want to thank everybody for attending. And I particularly want to thank the Jung Society for hosting. And I feel like today, we have a broad audience, I guess something like 388 people registered, which says to me, people are interested in this world and that this society, Pat, is a gathering place for people who are curious about the inner realms. And in this divisive and divided world, these spaces where we can talk and discuss things and love ideas is very, very, very important. And I just feel compelled to bring the inner and the outer together in that way. You will excuse me as an introvert. I have my crib notes. I can't remember everything I'm going to say, but I will talk to you directly. I wanted to start this. By the way, I'll talk about 10 or 15 minutes, probably closer to 10. Jung wrote, and I think this is a paraphrase, I couldn't find the exact reference, but maybe Henry or Dariane or Henry will know it. He wrote, "In the deepest chaos lies the seeds of creative transformation." In the deepest chaos lies the seeds of creative transformation. Every transformation, he wrote, demands as its precondition, quote, the ending of a world and the collapse of an old philosophy. And I chose so many relevant quotes to choose from Jung. And I chose these two because not only are they personally relevant to the story I'm about to tell you, but I think that this is very true that in these chaotic times, we're looking to seek faith in our capacity to survive chaotic times, not just on a personal level, but on a collective level. And that my story, though it's so personal, I believe is universal and perhaps has some seeds for others in this time of turbulence. For Murray talked about what the book is about, but just briefly, it's in three parts. It's the original fairy tale, then the commentary by Murray, Henry, and Dariane about the fairy tale, and also a beautiful foreword by Kenneth James, who unfortunately was teaching this weekend and couldn't join us. The narrator of the fairy tale, The Littlest Princess, is one who does not fit the shape of the culture, and the family has the shape of the culture or the shape that her family assigned to her. And so she must discover her true name or disappear. What's come to me in retrospect, and with the help of reading these commentaries, is this is the soul's negotiation with forces that would silence it or domesticate it. And that the wetlands and forests that the princess travels through on her adventures are an interior map of her interior world, and that they represent these hurdles, this heroine's journey, a self that refuses to be silenced and to be defined by others. Who is family? Where do I belong? These are the unconscious questions that provoke the writing of my tale. The tensions between loyalty and freedom, between compliance and agency, between obedience and disobedience are the fault lines I have been negotiating all my life and return to again as a writer. Life and writing life are not separate, let me tell you. The Greeks gave us Antigone, Shakespeare gave us Cordelia, and fairy tales give us Cinderella and her like. And the ancient unanswered question is, what do we owe the people that made us, and what do we owe ourselves? What do we owe the people that made us, and what do we owe ourselves? Now, about the writing, because a number of you here are writers and others are interested in the creative process. This is a bold statement, but it's honestly true. Writing this fairy tale rescued me. I've thought about subsequently in retrospect, and of course, most of us writers learn something in retrospect, not necessarily when we're in the process of writing, that it was inevitable that I would write a fairy tale at a time of crisis. And I've been thinking about that. Why would that be true? At the time, I believe that we are in that liminal state, in the waiting room of what comes next, in a dark night of the soul. We can't really see what's ahead of us. We can't really know. And at least in my experience, during this time, rational inquiry and reasoning were not possible to get me through this difficult time. In creating fiction, the mind leaps away from the original trauma and reimagines it in another context. And that we do that, we reimagine it, but without diminishing the severity of the harm or what took place. We just reimagine it. And a fairy tale form is a beautiful way to understand these deeper issues. What we have then is not the truth. It's not a realistic novel. We're not dealing in realism, but it is certainly a metaphoric truth, what we write. And in another way, I was primed to write a fairy tale. This is an answer to why a fairy tale. Is that at the time that I wrote this, I was already a well-published poet with an MFA, and I was very familiar and at home in working with images. So I was sort of predisposed to this. And then something else, this preparing for this has helped me understand a little bit more about my process. As I say, we know more in retrospect. I have an origin story to tell you about this writing. When I was a young child, maybe some of you can relate to this, my mother was exceedingly worried about my health. Whether she needed to be or not, I doubt it, but she was, which meant that she kept me home from school a lot, which meant that growing up, I spent a lot of time alone in a darkened room with only my imagination for company. And in that twilight dreamscape, I often listened to these wonderful recordings by famous actors of fairy tales. I had a wonderful recording of Claire Bloom reading Cinderella. I had Peter and the Wolf. And so I would be in twilight in this dreamscape, letting those stories in. And they were so meaningful to me. They were absolutely my friends. So this gives you a little background of what fed me early on as a lonely child. At the time that I wrote this fairy tale, as Murray mentioned and is in the book, I was, you would say, in the underworld. I was in the dark night of the soul. I did not know what the future was going to hold. I was lost. And importantly, because I was already a published poet, my creative energies, my life force felt completely unreachable. I doubted that anything mattered, but, and here comes Dr. Jung, something in me knew better. And what it knew is that it chose a form for me, and the form was a fairy tale. The form of a fairy tale gave shape to what was unsayable in any other way. And I do think sometimes big feelings, big emotions, big complexes might need the archetypal world and the imagery within it to express itself. So the form gave shape to what I couldn't really say. And then it insisted on being written. But what's even more startling to me, again, in retrospect, because I would never be able to say this in the moment, that the act of finding language for what was unspoken and unsaid was itself a form of faith, was a form of faith. And this is what happened. I was lost. I went into the woods to be solitary, and I sought refuge by a cabin by a lake. Then, after several days, something new entered my mind, a voice and an image. The voice began in that old familiar way, and in that fantastical way, once upon a time. Then I saw an image of a lonely girl sitting at a window staring at the moon. And I deeply felt her loneliness. And this was the beginning of the fairy tale, the princess who found her name. At the time, I had just started an analysis, and I was ripe to explore this situation in writing. But when I began to write, I had no idea that I was writing a fairy tale. It was not like Dale said, "Oh, I'm in trouble. I think I'll write a fairy tale and get out of trouble." Not at all. Not at all. I was compelled by the imagery. I followed the image. Every day I would wake up and I would think, what happened to that little girl? What's she doing now? And I don't know if this is the correct lingo. You guys can tell me. I felt like it was participation mystique. She and I were bonded. And so every day I would wake up and I would walk by the lake and then I would go up to the loft and I would start writing. And lo and behold, more came. This became the fairy tale. As this happened, the deadness, the sorrow, the confusion lifted because in the writing and in the discovery of the imagery, I was infused by a new life force. Um, I felt like I was pierced by a numinous energy that I couldn't name, and I didn't care to name it. It was just life-giving. And what's interesting, and one of the consequences I want to say from writing this fairy tale, there are many consequences, is that in this process of following the images day after day, writing the fairy tale, was the harbinger of me becoming a novelist, moving from poetry to novel and long form. I do not know if I would have become a novelist had I not had that experience of working over time with the character. Um, and the other amazing thing, I have two more things to say, and then I'm going to turn it over to everybody else, is that I discovered that looking back at this fairy tale, everything that was in there became and was a roadmap for the issues and the complexes that would arise in an analysis. It wasn't that they were completely unconscious, but kind of pretty much unconscious. And so the miraculous thing is that this fairy tale with its imagery, which I never interpreted, I just followed, really became what was the actual situation in my psyche that I worked with in analysis. The other last thing I want to say is that I've been very taken with Marie Tatar's book, Heroine with 1,001 Faces. Many of you may know that book. And it's not dissing Joseph Campbell's, ubiquitous Hero with 1,000 Faces. But one of the things that she points out is the difference in the heroine's journey, and that this princess in my fairy tale, who I think of as a heroine, was not after glory, and she was not after immortality, and she was not a combat warrior. Her mission was repair and rescue. And I do believe, and Maria Tatar in her book points out, this is one of the differences in what we could call the heroine's journey. And again, this was totally unconscious in me. And here it is. I'm still learning 35 years later. I'm still learning from this fairy tale. So that's my little story.
Well, Dale, thank you so much. What a vivid story that is. And, as Jungians, we say the unconscious has a prospective view in mind. That means it's future looking. And it gives us, through dreams and experiences like yours, it gives us an outline of things to come, our journey ahead. It isn't just looking back into childhood and the past, but also looking forward to what your life is going to be in the future. And that's what it was for you. I'm going to introduce now Dariane Pictet, who is a Jungian analyst at ISEP in Zurich. She's many things. She's an actress, has been in many roles in her life in the theater. She's a teacher. She's an author. She wrote a recent paper published just this year called Also in a Fairy Tale. The title is She Walks Northward, The Healing of the Heart in Anderson's Snow Queen. So Dariane has really focused this year, it seems, in the recent past on fairy tale work, fairy tale interpretation. In the past, her special interests have been the work of Marion Woodman, the Canadian Jungian analyst who did so much in the women's movement and body work and movement and so on. Dariane worked very closely with Marion Woodman and has kept those practices going in her work with clients. She's also very interested and has been involved in Buddhist meditation for many years. She's traveled to India many times, and she's working with students in India now on their uh, study of analytical psychology and Jungian writings. And her commentary on Dale's fairy tale, which is titled The Song of Every Name, Reflection on the Littlest Princess, she offers a work that I felt when I read it comes straight from the heart and is addressed to the heart. So, Dariane, do you want to say a few words about your contribution?
Thank you, Murray, for this introduction. It's always quite interesting and moving to hear someone describe oneself. Well, first of all, I want to thank you, Dale, for including me in this project, as well as Murray and everyone else that was involved. It was very exciting for me to do. We didn't really know each other. In fact, we don't know each other. And to receive in my inbox a fairy tale and then think, okay, do something with it. And of course, not knowing someone and anyone, anyway, you don't want to get personal and interpretative. So it's a fine line um, as to what a fairy tale like a dream can reveal of someone. And that's not the point. The point was to stay in the imagery and the prose. And I tried to write in prose to stay in the feeling of the fairy tale world, the once upon a time world, and to try and observe and reflect the movements of the story, which, as Murray said, is a tale of individuation. That's the inner development to become more fully who you are, letting go of adaptation and persona and compromise, and learn to listen to your own voice. And although this journey, like you just said, this heroine journey, is similar, it's unique too. The movements we have to go through, we all have to go through these movements, but we'll all do it through the color of our own psychology. And that's where it gets really interesting. And to do that through the images that you brought, I found, particularly exciting. The unloved princess, misunderstood, not very well mothered, all that. And then she decides to become a mink. She wants to become invisible. But then what is a mink? Minks are invisible maybe to some people, but they're not invisible to each other. And of course, they travel in places that we don't travel, the earth, the forest, all this underground. And then I thought, how interesting that the first movement of the soul, of the personality wanting to find its voice, has to go through this deep, hidden, mysterious natural world. And then the next movement was, oh no, now I'm going to fly and I'm going to be a bird. And I thought, wow, that's very interesting. When you've been wounded, you want to fly on astral planes, you want to see the great perspectives, you don't want to feel what you're feeling, and then you want the spiritual dimension. So all that happens. So there's this flight, this beautiful flight. And then, of course, none of these places, she doesn't belong to any of these places. And so the story keeps egging her on. And then she meets, and that's what I found particularly poignant, is a wounded, dismembered boy in the ocean, and only his head is left. And he says in a very kind of aggressive way, go and get my bits and bring them back to me. My legs, my arms, my torso, everything, my heart. And he's not kind or nice or anything, like anyone who's suffering. When we're usually not very nice when we're suffering. And I thought, how extraordinary that for this woman to find her name, this princess, she has to heal the masculine. the masculine in herself. But of course, that is also engaging with the masculine in the collective. And we're all very aware of what's happening at the moment in the collective and so this harshness of the masculine who's hasn't grieved, hasn't felt anything. It's a voice that we see a lot in politics today, and it's very harsh voice. And she has to bring, his arms, his limbs, his agency back, his movement back until finally she replaces the heart. And then he changes and he becomes soft and a wonderful inner partner. And in Jungian psychology, we think of the inner partner of a man, of a woman as, a creative impulse. It's the guy inside who says, "Hey, wake up! We're going to write a book today." That's the positive masculine. But we have to transform that in ourselves. So not only men have to change, but we have to work with that inner masculine because it can mimic a man in the wrong way, authority and discipline and all this, but it's not that. So that I found very, very moving, that she had to go through that to find her voice in the end. And then she ends up, of course, with a horse. So there's also, again, the world of the animal at the end. And of course, the horses, anybody who rides horses know that they can find their way home. That's one thing a horse can do. He'll always find the stable. So what better companion in life is to have a strong instinctual connection to a part of you that will always take you home. I mean, how beautiful is that? So that's the fairy tale world, which I'm always excited about. Since I'm a little girl, I'm excited about that. I'm excited about the fairy tale world because it's like dreams. And Jung said in one of his, I think it was the children's dreams seminars, he says, if somebody gives you a dream of their childhood, you're going to get the whole map of what they need to develop in their lives. And I find that fairy tales are like that. If I ask a client, what is your favorite fairy tale? And we start from there. And it's always exciting. And then, of course, you can have different fairy tales that you love through your life because you're addressing or developing different moments in your trajectory. But the one that you asked your parents over and over and over to read me that story again and again. At some level, it's got your name, it's got your story, it's got your complexes, it's got your wounding, and it's got also your rescue. It shows you the step of how you're going to find yourself again. Because that's, in the end, that's what myth and fairy tales are all about. It's the wisdom of the world, of people telling stories since the beginning of time. And all these stories, which Jung calls the collective unconscious in a way, can be tapped into, and we can tap into this wisdom, and it can map the way when we're feeling lost.
Thank you so much, Dariane. Spoken from the heart to the heart with great zest and warmth, as you always show, as long as I've known you, Dariane. Now we come to Henry Abramovitch. He's a Jungian analyst. He lives in Israel, in Jerusalem. He's a Canadian by birth, as I am, and also a Yale graduate, as I am. And we've put our forces together in recent years and written some plays together, Henry and I, that you can actually see on YouTube. If you go there and type our names in, you'll find them. Henry's special interests are family dynamics. He grew up in a large and interesting family. He's written about sibling relationships, and he's also very interested in the topic of friendship. And he and I have discussed that at great length and have written about it together. In his commentary on this fairy tale, which he titled Wild Freedom, a commentary about sisters, minks, and spirituals, he reflects on the nature of sibling relationships. Henry.
Thank you, Murray. One of the extraordinary things about this wonderful book is that it is written largely by friends. Murray and I have a deep and creative friendship. Dariane is the leading star of our ensemble. Dale and I have a deep bond, even though we've never yet met in person. Everyone has a name given to him by God and by his father, his mother. Everyone has a name given to him by the sea and by his death. In this poem, the Israeli poetess Zelda reminds us of an important but neglected secret. We do not have only one name, but many names. And one of the most profound is our sibling name, our identity as a sister or brother. In many cultures, sibling birth status is so ingrained in the language and psyche that there's no escape from sibling identity and hierarchy. And this is the case for the littlest princess and Princess N. Their contrasting birth identity defines them and constrains them. While living in their mother's palace, they cannot escape their sister names. This little princess's sister name is the trap she must name and so overcome. There's another fundamental paradox about siblings. Sisters share the same home and more genes than anybody else. Yet, despite both nature and nurture, research has found that siblings are different, dramatically different. For Princess Anne and the Littlest Princess, the contrast is even stronger. They have what I call polarized identities. Here, the nasty, envious elder and the submissive, pleasing younger. Parental favoritism or emotional inequality can leave sibling wounds that may never heal. As a result, dealing with sister wounds is often the key to individuation, as Wild Freedom shows so poignantly. Significantly, none of the characters have a personal name. Strikingly, the firstborn daughter only has an initial, N. I've wondered deeply about this. In clinical writing, it is common to refer to a patient by their initial. Nevertheless, I find this practice disturbing. To me, it always references Kafka's character Joseph K., a man on trial without knowing what he's accused of. I wondered why Dale used an initial. I think she did to give the inner experience of the first princess, that she wasn't a full person, that part of her was truncated or cut off, that she was more in a role of being a princess and much less a person in her own rights. In fairy tales, being a princess seems wonderful, but in real life, it's very often a burden. Such special status cuts a person off from natural intimacy with non-royals. You're seen too much as the daughter of. In fact, this syndrome is so common it has a special name, preacher's kids, or just PKs. A PK is a child of someone with high moral visibility in the community, like a rabbi or a Jungian analyst. The burden is that any misdeed by the child reflects badly on the status of the parent, and so the child feels inwardly constricted and constrained. Princess Anne and the littlest prince are both caught up in this PK syndrome. Their emotional freedom is cramped, living in a palace with a mother who is the queen. During her sea voyages, the littlest princess, with her bird guide, Hieronymus, sings spirituals as they flew together over the ocean. Dale and I share a strong connection to our shared Jewish heritage, but it was an unexpected joy to see that we also share a passion for these spirituals. Good news! Chariots are coming, good news! And I don't want to be left behind. Each one of these songs is familiar as old friends. But I also wondered why Dale included spirituals. After thought, I thought spirituals reflect perseverance over adversity and the hope of arriving at a better place, and above all, spirit. And here's Hieronymus speaking to the littlest princess. Singing practically keeps me alive when I'm on doing a solo, he told her. I will teach you the words if you like, the essentials. The Talmud teaches that we are not to seek what came before, nor what will come after. Yet in my active imagination, I see the seed, the spark of wild freedom emerging from Dale's unconscious and her family constellation like a seed pod bursting into beauty. And after the story was finished, I imagined Dale shining. Through writing, she has liberated herself from all the constraints of her past. Her story has set herself free into a wild freedom.
Thank you, Henry. That was very uplifting, and we're soaring, I think, in the heavens now. Dale, do you feel you'd like to say a few words? I think we've celebrated your work. I'm sure it will become a classic. It's a fairy tale for our time and all time, and I think it will live on for many, many years to come.
Well, thank you for that high praise. I'm deeply honored. And I'm so touched by all that you have said. I I'm learning so much. You have taught me. This is when I read your commentaries, it's like reading metafiction. You know, for a writer, the story is me and it's not me, in the same way that the characters in my novel are something to do with me, but not me. And I didn't, of course, in the writing, understand the deep archetypal significance that you have highlighted for me. And if I had, I wouldn't be writing it because it's almost takes a kind of ignorance, a kind of, I don't know what I'm doing. I'll just let this princess talk. And so now, what, 35 years later, is when I'm learning at your tutelage what what this is about. And I wish I could say the story was over
No,
because,
you don't. You don't want the story to be over.
well, I mean that part. I mean, it sounds so great. She found the parts and bravo. But there's more scattering together, whether it's a body in the water. There's always more work is part of what I'm feeling, and I'm just so grateful. And I learned several things. You know, one of the things, and I think Henry and Murray, you talked about this, is the business of naming, which both of you wrote about, and I realize is actually something that's in my first novel. The heroine of my first novel gives herself a nickname, gives herself two nicknames as she changes. And I thought about what the power of naming is, and when you name something, you have dominion over it, and the necessity to find your own name. And both of you brought that out, and Henry, you just spoke about that in a family constellation. And Darian, I so related to your lyricism in writing what you wrote as um, a beautiful, tender understanding of the feminine soul, and maybe it's not just feminine, unfolding. The unfold. I mean, I like to think it's not just feminine; it just happened to be my soul, but um, the necessity, meaning the necessity for heart, and how hard it is to find that at times, the hurdles we have to go through, especially now. So,
We want to leave some time now
yeah,
for
right.
commentaries from the audience, questions, points for discussion. Please keep it short. We have about 15 minutes left. I see there's a lot in chat. And Pat, do you want to take charge of this part?
Yes, I'm going to read a question here. In a sentence, define the difference between the heroine's journey and the hero's journey.
Well, Dale spoke to that.
That I'll just speak. I'll just repeat this again. You know, in terms of the fairy tale I wrote, I mean, I didn't have these. I'm writing a heroine's journey, or I'm writing a fairy tale. Just wrote, and what the commentaries have helped me see is how archetypal that was. But from what I understand, and from the scholars, is that the values that are being sought are very different in the heroine's journey. Um, they're not about glory or immortality. They are about repair, restoration, and the means are often Tatar brings up how they're often used, like in Scheherazade, storytelling is the saving grace, or kind of sneaky ways, because it's not about power, it's not about domination over. And so while there are hurdles, the means to which one accomplishes moving through the journey have less to do with brawn, ego, um, and the things we associate with the heroes. And I have to say, in our contemporary culture, all over the world, we are seeing an exaggerated version of what some who are attuned to that think of as being their heroic journey, meaning combat warriors. And so I feel like this other model for restoration of wholeness is the heroine's journey. I'm happy to have anybody else comment on that.
Yeah, we
Don't
had
have other
someone.
questions as well.
Yeah, we had a comment in relation to it. Succinctly, I suppose, the hero strives to unite with the anima principle. The heroine strives to unite with the animus principle, and all that implies. Maybe a Jungian would like to comment on that. I don't know.
We'd have to write a book about that, I think.
Okay. All right. We have another question here. Dale, can you comment on the essay you've written, Writing as Self-Enchantment? I'll look forward to reading it, but am intrigued by the title and would love to hear you touch on the general ideas in that essay.
The general ideas was that in this personal crisis, I, which isn't, I mean, the details aren't important, but I was under a sort of bewitchment. I had lost myself. And when I began writing is when I became enchanted with my own images. And it broke this bewitchment by an outer force. So it was a coming to terms with, I guess you would say, almost a sense of the magic within, because the story sort of wrote itself. It was effortless, meaning it really wanted out. And the fact that it wanted out, that it was there and it moved me forward was a kind of enchantment. I couldn't let it go. And it saved me. It was a life force. And I don't think we can will that. I don't think we can predict it. You folks know more about this, why the soul opens up at times and other times isn't open to those forces. But at that time, I was lucky enough to find my own source of enchantment. And so not needing it from the outside.
Okay, someone has asked, what prompted you to publish this at this point in your life?
Mm. Not sure I can answer that. It certainly wasn't about fame, glory, or money. It was a desire, I think, to speak about what I just said about in the essay. That I feel like, again, I'll repeat, I feel like this is a personal story, but it's a universal story. And another part of the self-enchantment essay has to do um, the bind that I think this is a gendered issue, but it doesn't have to be. The bind between what the creative force wants and what so we call that the wild part and the part that is domesticated. And an essay that was very important to me when I became a writer was an essay by Adrienne Rich called Writing as Revision. At the time, she had been divorced and she came out as a lesbian, but she had had children and she was a mother. And she was talking about the tasks of motherhood, which, stability, self-sacrifice, predictability, and how opposite they can be from the creative force, which is exploration, daring, risk, wildness. Um, they're at odds, and they're particularly at odds, I think, for women. And we even see this now when if you see movies about writers and they're male writers, they have a bottle of bourbon and a lot of cigarettes and a lot of female companions. But if you would change that figure into a woman, she would be a monster. She would become a monster because, especially if she had children. So that's my little feminist take on this.
I have a comment, just a comment from someone. I love your focus on images that have a life of their own to be noticed and paid attention to. I will answer. The next question is everybody's going to get the recording directly sent to them. You'll have 14 days to listen to it, and it'll be explained in the email that comes with it. Okay, so um, can we suggest with joyful anticipation a sequel to the heroine's story in connection with the lifelong ongoing individuation process we all must recognize in ourselves?
I think that's an open question for all of us.
It's a challenge, Dale. Another fairy tale from your present age. What would that be? This one was from midlife. This is a midlife story. You're now reaching an age when you are in the later years, and that's another type of transition.
It is. Are there fairy tales written? I'm curious. Are there fairy tales written about that transition? Any of you know fairy tales that cover that transition? That's an interesting question.
Well, crones, witches, women at the crossroads, they're usually portrayed as ugly and old. I suppose that's how youth looks at us. But yes, there are. Hecate is the one who sees. She sees Demeter being kidnapped by Hades. She has the vision. She has that vision of seniority. So yes, I think there are, if you look in the mythic literature, these characters, except they don't look glamorous in the sense of, I'm 60 or 70 or 80 and I want to go into the dark, into the depth, and leave this world behind and prepare myself for the big jump. We probably need a new image for that, a little bit more modern. But I think the witch at the crossroads with the crow and the cat and that kind of thing.
It's so interesting, Dariane, because as we know, I mean, I always say when my grandmother was my age, her teeth were in the glass and she was wearing cotton stockings. And now people much older don't seem to be crones. And so, or physically crones. And so, and start people start new jobs, new lives, new. And so I think that's a really wonderful thing that you're talking about. And what would that image be? How would we talk about that? Because we're still that age and we're still facing mortality, but our lives are so different than our parents and our grandparents. So I
Yeah,
don't,
to a certain degree, but the age does come. You do
yeah.
get tired and all that, and it's important. We're in a society that really favors youth. But I try to remind myself, for the people behind me who are 10 or 15 or 20, I am as ancient as my grandmother was. It's just that we look at each other with the soul's eyes, and the soul's eyes has eternity. It comes from eternity, so we don't age. I'm inside, I'm 18. Of course, I am 18. But I remind myself that that's not what other people see. And that's very important too.
Well,
We have another question if you'd like to take it. How do you now look at this fairy tale within the context of the current zeitgeist of this moment in the world?
I didn't quite understand that. How do you look at what?
How do you now look at this fairy tale within the context of the current zeitgeist of this moment in the world?
I'll answer that briefly and then I'll turn it over because it comes to the quote I said that in the deepest chaos lie the seeds of transformation. And that's personal, but it's collective. And so the thing I really want to get across the most is that yes, is a personal story, but can we each turn to our inner guides and our inner creative forces as we're in this disintegrating time, in this time of great disunity and divisiveness, to find new images, to find new sources of life that give us hope. That would be my greatest desire to come from this.
Well, I would just add, I think even in these dark times, that your story shows that even if you're trapped and you feel unloved and you're wounded, there still is a possibility to begin your journey.
And you don't always know it.
You can't. It's like what Jung said, if somebody comes to you and knows exactly what they want from therapy, they're living somebody else's life.
Interesting. Mhm.
Um, this sounds a bit like a lot of the research and the use of psychedelics for personal growth and the healing from wounding from many sources. Any thoughts?
I um I'm experimenting, outing myself here, um, because I do think there's a potential of lifting the veils. Um, and my experience is about, well, it aligns with spiritual traditions. It aligns particularly with Buddhist and interconnectedness and a sense of a larger cosmos and an egoless state where there's a freedom to um, it, feel yourself as part of something much larger, which I think probably is also the end goal of individuation or something like that. I don't know. You can tell me. I don't know.
Okay, and then there's Jody, I'm about to read your comment. There was one comment in front of it. Alan, and I'm not sure how you pronounce this last name, maybe Kynan, has written a book in the Ever After, Fairy Tales for the Second Half of Life. And then Jody made a comment here, Vasilisa the Beautiful. She goes through the woods, encounters the witch who teaches her discernment, and then she finds her creativity, and her art is the reason why she becomes the queen.
Well, I think we're going to have to stop. I think we're challenged to write some more. Maybe Darian, you can become a new von Franz and write a book about fairy tales for the second half of life from a Jungian perspective. And we'll all continue working on these very big questions. And Dale, thank you so much for your work, for your life, for your good spirit, your creativity, and for who you are.
Thank you so
You're the
much.
best.
I'm indebted to you. Thank you. And thank you, Pat, and the Society for hosting and all who came.
Yes, thank you all very much. We really appreciate it.
Bye for now.
Bye.